Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. Today I'm here to talk about a book that I am just so excited to talk about. It is Vampires of El Norte. Yes, this is a Spanglish title by Isabel Cañas, and I did receive a free advanced reader's copy via NetGalley. So I am under no obligation to talk about it, but I was so excited when I got the ARC for this because I really liked The Hacienda, which was Cañas's first book, and I was just really excited to see what she would do with vampires and with the historical setting, and I was so not disappointed. So first of all, the story follows Nena and Nestor. They are two children when we pick up the story. When they are 13, things are starting to change for them. Their families are starting to kind of look at their friendship as something that maybe should not keep going. They're starting to hit puberty, and especially Nena's mom is starting to think that she should not be hanging out with this boy anymore. Nena is the daughter of a ranchero, so somebody who owns a chunk of land, who's a rancher, a wealthier man. And Nestor is the son of a vaquero, of a cowboy, a field and kind of ranch hand. And so the two of them come from different classes in a society that is extremely class structured and where the two should not mix. But as kids, they were allowed to play together and be together. Now that they've hit puberty, though, things are starting to change. That is when Nestor and Nena start digging for some some fortune that is said to have been hidden near there. Nestor has seen some lights over near one of the rancho borders, and so they decide to go at night and investigate that maybe this is where they're going to find a big fortune, and then nothing's going to stop them from being together. Well, that is where the vampires kind of come in. They are not called vampires until well into the story, but it is clear that's what is happening. They have an encounter with a vampire, and Nestor ends up running away from the rancho. This whole time he believes that Nena has been killed, and 9 years later he comes back to the ranch, and Nena is not dead, but she's extremely pissed off that he just ran away without a word to her, and like she doesn't understand what happened. He doesn't understand what happened either. Nena is now a curandera, so somebody who deals with herbs and healing. And there's a big threat to their land coming from the north, coming from the Americans. So it's essentially the center of this story is a love story. It's a story of Nena and Nestor together trying to kind of figure out the world in which they live in, trying to figure out each other. Are they still the same people that pledged friendship and love when they were kids? Or are their circumstances so changed that that can no longer hold true? The love story I loved, except for Nena. Several times I just wanted to be like, honey, what are you doing? She is brought up very much to believe that her dad's land, the ranch, is the most important thing, more important than anything else. And as the daughter of a ranchero, her role is really to marry well and create connections that will help preserve her father's wealth and the ranch. So lots of outside and both external and internal conflict there. Next thing is the vampires. If you are only interested in the vampires, I don't think this is going to be the book for you. The vampires really are a subplot in the story. They are not the main feature. However, there are key scenes. The vampires are key to the story, but they're definitely a subplot. The heart of the story is the two main characters and their love story. The vampires figure in much more minimally, and you only get bigger, more important scenes with them towards the end of the story, or towards the big climax of the story. So I would not pick up this book solely for the vampires. Now the vampires, like I said, although they are not always there, they play a key role, in large part because it's obvious that they are stand-ins for American incursion and American imperialism into Mexico. The story is set in 1940s Mexico, which would now be Texas. So the history of that plays out as a background and as the setting. So if you don't know any of that history, that's fine. You don't need to know any of that. You'll recognize the American process as imperialism and the threat that these Americans pose, and that's all you really need to know to understand the dynamics here. But if you know some of that history, I think it adds an extra layer of meaning, and especially what we can read the vampires as, given how Cañas uses the vampires. It is absolutely brilliant. And let me tell you that Cañas is an expert at this. She has a PhD in history. In fact, in the author's note, she tells us that she was finishing up her PhD while writing Vampires of El Norte. And the idea for the story came to her by when she was examining her mother's thesis sources. So she was looking at these primary sources, and she finds this source that calls the Americans vampires, and it's like a light bulb. Like, why hasn't this metaphor been used more, right? And it's brilliant. I love the way the vampires are used that stands in for American imperialism, and I wondered why I hadn't seen this used before. But I am particularly grateful that I was reading a story using this connection, and that it was written by a Mexican American woman. Like, that adds so much to the telling of this story. It is absolutely brilliant, and I am glad that Cañas was the one to tell this story, at least the first one that I've come across that I got to read. So the history, the allegory, or the metaphor here of the vampires was so brilliant. I enjoyed the love story, even though I wanted to knock some sense into Nena from time to time. I think this book is particularly for anybody that these words have meaning to. If these words have meaning to you, you will love this story. Jacal, peón, merienda, corral, anacahuita, choza. If you know, like, if you speak Spanish, or speaking of Spanish, that these words have meaning to you, you have to pick up this book. You're gonna enjoy it. Now, on the other hand, if you're like that, I have no clue what you all just said, maybe this book is not for me, maybe, but the key with this book, that even though it uses Spanish throughout the story, you don't need to know. These words don't have to have special meaning to you in order for you to invest in the story, in order for you to get into it. I just feel like for people that know these words, that know what they mean, it is extra, you just have to pick it up. Everybody else, you want to gauge everything else in before you decide whether this is a story for you or not. So while this story has these horror themes of the vampires, and there is blood in the as part of the story, like, there are particular scenes in which there's a lot of blood gushing, in which you see animals kind of drained, and they talk about the carcass and all of that, and you see the vampires biting people. That is not, it's, the blood aspects to me were not that gory, and especially because they're not present throughout the book. You get a couple, really three key scenes in which there's a little bit of gore, and it's not, the first scene is not super explicit. The second scene is a little bit more explicit because it takes place in the context of a battle. The third scene is not that explicit. So I found it very manageable. However, I am somebody who is a bit desensitized to violence and gore. I blame my history degree for this. When you read enough history, you really do get desensitized to some of it. But I feel confident in saying that it's not, that if you are somebody who's sensitive to these things, that you might still want to pick this up, because it's only in 3 scenes that there's really, I think, that in which the blood and the gore really is significantly present. And some of it is kind of easy to skim or skip those sections of. Other content warnings are for classism, violence, and use of guns. That is all present there. But I think if you are at all interested in Vampires of El Norte, I think it's worth a shot. I think it really is. And what I am realizing is that historical horror is particularly my thing. Like, it's done really well, and especially when I have been finding uh, people like Cañas who are actually historians who are handling the history expertly and also know when they can kind of play with the history, right? Because you don't pick up these books for history. You're not trying to learn history from a horror book. But when it's used well and the author knows when to bend that history to fit the narrative, oof, I just love it. And I think this is one of those books that does this particularly well. So, let me know if you want to pick up Vampires of El Norte. Let me know if you've already picked it up and what you think of it, because, yeah, I want to know if anybody else was frustrated, as frustrated as I was with Nena, and just like kind of love Nestor. I tend to relate more to the female characters in stories, but Nestor was like the typical vaquero, like good guy vaquero though, and I just loved it. So, anyways, thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.